Well, thanks for tuning in, and I hope that you're having a great May and soon to be a great June. A quick note before we get started on this program. Two things. First of all, I wanted to let you know that I have one of my meet and greets coming up where I get on the line and answer any questions or take any comments you have about the Plus Club or the shows. That's going to be on Tuesday, June 3rd at 10 p.m. Eastern. And I'll be on video, and you can ask me any questions you want. You could type in your questions, or I can open up your mic and you can speak your questions. So I hope that you'll join me. There is a link on the homepage at jimharold.net. If you look at the site, on the right-hand side, there's paranormal, or there's Plus Club news and notes kind of thing on the far right sidebar, and you'll see the link there. You can click on that and sign up as a Plus Club member. And then secondly, I wanted to ask a favor. You know, we're trying to get the word out this summer and take everything to the next level. And one of our Plus Club members, Sandy, has created a great flyer for us that promotes the free shows, because I always like to start off with that and introduce people to the programs via the free shows. And if you go to jimharold.com/flyers, you will find that flyer, and you can right-click and save to your computer and print it out. It's a black and white PDF, and post it at your local laundromat or your supermarket or coffee shop. I would really, really appreciate it. We've got people saying that they've posted from places like Minnesota and the United Kingdom and Ohio, and you guys are my best supporters. I really appreciate it. And if you could do this little favor for me, I would appreciate it. Print out a copy or two and post it at an appropriate place in your neck of the woods. We thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you can make that meet and greet, and also hope that you can print out a couple of copies of those flyers and share them with folks. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks so much, and here's the show. Ghosts. Have they become a cliche? Or can we once again examine this phenomena seriously? After all, isn't it really our own afterlife we're curious about? Let's delve a little deeper on Jim Harold's Ghost Insight. Welcome to Ghost Insight. I am Jim Harold, and so glad to be with you once again. Now, one of the hot topics out there is that of paranormal investigation. It seems almost any place you go, somebody has a car with a logo on the side and people who are out there investigating the paranormal. And certainly, while there are some strong investigators out there, there's a lot of people who maybe just decided yesterday that they're going to become a paranormal investigator. And I wanted to bring a paranormal investigator on to talk about his work in investigation, his thoughts on investigation in general. And we're also going to talk about his organization and some of his specific theories. So glad to have him with us. Ben Robison. Now, Ben was born in the Pacific Northwest during the late 70s, and he grew up exposed to ghosts, UFOs, and Bigfoot. Whether it was the home he lived in that was haunted, the many shared stories of aliens that his father spoke of, or seeing firsthand what he believes was a Sasquatch. It would seem that Ben had anything but a regular upbringing. As a result of this, the things that aren't so regular are what intrigue Ben. Like so many other people out there, Ben experienced something so profound and unimaginable that he was left with only one option to look at it closer, and that's why he founded the Autonomous Studies of the Enigmatic and Paranormal, and we are so glad that he's with us tonight. Ben Robison, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
So let's talk about some of those reasons, and I think we all have them. You know, growing up, I had some family stories of the paranormal that had always been told to me, and I think I'm a little bit older than you. I remember growing up as a small child, watching In Search of, and all of that stuck with me, and I think engendered my interest. What is your story? Can you tell us about some of these things that set you on the paranormal path?
Sure. Very similar backgrounds. I grew up in a home that was very open to the concept of, spiritual interaction and, going out and trying to kind of, in a non-formal way, seek our own answers as well. Definitely, was a product of growing up and watching a lot of the shows that were out there, Unsolved Mysteries and
Yeah.
In Search of, and they were shows that captivated my interest and sparked this, within me at a very young age. But it was more, I would say, the personal experiences I had, especially at a young age, a very influential time in my life where I had certain uh, profound experiences take place. Um, One of them was in the 80s. I lived just north of where I live now, in a little town called Longview, Washington. And we moved into a duplex. It was your standard, group of duplexes, kind of almost in a shape of a horseshoe, per se.
Mm-hmm.
And where we lived in the duplex was the closest, unit to the main road. And, we got outfitted into our rooms and everything. And some time had, gone by while, after we had been living there. And I was laying there one evening, getting ready to fall asleep. And it just so happened that my bed was up against the closet door, which any kid in their right mind did not enjoy, but that was what it was. So I had a ritual. Every night I made sure that bad boy was nice and latched, and I proceeded to try to get some rest. And that evening I had my back to that closet, and I all of a sudden I started feeling a breeze. And I thought for some reason, because the window was behind me on the wall, I thought maybe the window had been left open. So I turned over to look at the window and actually found that my closet door was open. It was open roughly, boy, I would say probably 8 to 10 inches.
Ooh.
And in that doorway was a dim lit lighting going on. There was no light in this closet. It was a very small closet, but what I saw in the closet in this dim light was a blonde girl with a very baby blue dress, full dress on, and she had a patch over her left eye, and she had her arms reached out towards me, and she was kind of like curling her fingers in a rhythmic fashion from her pinkies up to her index finger, like she was coaxing me towards her.
Ooh.
And obviously I was petrified, and I didn't hear her say anything. So telepathically, what I was getting was her saying, "Come with me," over and over and over. And, I was riddled with fear, and I couldn't even move. I was frozen. And by the time I finally got myself to actually move, I decided I'm going to roll over, and this can't be real. This is a figment of my imagination. Well, I roll over, and I can still feel that breeze, but then I felt the breeze start to die away. And I, conjured up enough, just bravery to turn over and look back at the closet. And at that point, the closet was only about an inch, maybe open, inch or two. And
Right.
the light was dying out. The clothes that were kind of wavering because of the wind were coming to a rest. She was no longer there. And at that point, I sprung out of that bed and went flying and screaming. All capacities came back to me. And because of the life I was raised in, being open to this stuff, those kind of things, yeah, they might be startling and a little bit normally kind of freaky per se. We were a little bit more desensitized, I guess, to it. And because they saw how much conviction I had behind what had happened to me, they knew something was different. So we started doing a little bit of research, and that was just starting with talking with neighbors. And, just so happened the next day or so, a neighbor was out washing his car. He had been living there for some years. And so we just, went over and broached the very awkward topic of, hey, has anything strange gone on?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, not that I know of. And so then, we asked questions like, well, has anything bad happened in this area? And we kind of, gave him a little bit of information as to what had transpired. And he goes, well, actually about 2-3 years before you guys moved in, a young teenage girl was at a party in the adjacent duplex and was stabbed and murdered to death.
Oh my goodness.
And we were, obviously that piqued our interest. And so we asked more questions like, well, what did she look like? She was blonde haired.
Oh.
So we then went down to the local library, went through a bunch of microfiche, found the article on it, and her name was Melissa Merchant. And Melissa Merchant was about 14 years old. She had kind of, your typical, teenage girl. She was out trying to, socialize and did a little bit of partying, I guess. And she ended up at that party and ended up being the wrong party to be at. And this gentleman showed up, much older than the rest of the crowd, and took her to a back room and murdered her.
Oh my goodness.
And he literally got off with it scot-free, even though her blood was on his zipper. So yeah. And the thing is, this man still lives in the town and everything. And the town, I think, has realized that they really made a big mess up, and they've done a, pretty big effort to try to cover it up and quiet the whole thing. The thing is, I knew nothing about this. I was very, unaware of any of this. And as we discover this, we find out she was wearing a baby blue dress the day she was murdered even.
Wow.
Now, the only thing that didn't match up was the patch over her left eye. And we chatted with a psychic and a medium, and they theorized a couple things. Whether or not those were what could have happened or what it was, it's far from me to say. One of them had suggested maybe it was a symbolic thing, the patch over her eye. Obviously, we wanted to know, well, what would have happened if Ben would have said, yes, I'll go with you? And the other theory was that I would have probably gone into limbo. They believe that she was in limbo as a result of, what had transpired and took place, and, so on and so forth. So, that was huge. That was a huge thing. I mean, there's things that happened prior to that to me, and things that happened after that, to me, that I would believe were supernatural in origin. That one, though, still sticks out to this day, and because of its story, has still been the biggest impact to why I wanted to further my my studies. And I mostly felt bad for Melissa because she was a victim, and that was partly why I wanted to get into this field, so that way I could help not only the clients, but maybe in the long run somehow help the entities that are needing answers or needing some guidance.
So this has inspired you to follow this life and to really make this a big part of your life in investigating paranormal claims. Now,
exactly.
What are your thoughts about people who say, and sometimes I even have expressed these concerns on my show, is that people watch Ghost Hunters. I'm just naming it as one show, nothing against that particular show. And they see it, or Paranormal State, or wherever the show is. They see it and they say, aha, I'm going to become a paranormal investigator. And they go buy, a black shirt with a logo and a digital recorder, and off they go, supposedly cleansing spirits and so forth. What are your thoughts about this movement into it's almost like, the way I compare it is, people used to go bowling. Now they become paranormal investigators. And I'm not directing that towards you, but I'm just saying it's like, let's go do this for fun. So what are your thoughts? I do want to talk about your theories and specifically your group. Or what are your thoughts about this movement in general?
Actually, I love this topic. I think for a lot of us, we start off that way. And for a lot of that group of people. There's two different, I think, psyches. There is what you call your ghost hunter and then your paranormal researcher. I figured out very early on, that, you're an armchair, investigator sitting there watching Grant and, Ryan Buell and all them people,
Right.
tramp around and do their stuff. Right. So what I started doing was actually studying the techniques, studying the equipment they were using, questioning all that and doing my own research. I spent literally about a year before I even started my own organization, just kind of furthering my knowledge. Now, my thoughts about people who do this are, it's unfortunate. A lot of people choose to go with the ghost hunting mentality. And that's where I think we're having, quite a bit of problems within this field of research. We have people who are there to thrill seek. They don't really have a lot of regard for the historical value of locations. They don't have a lot of regard for the client's welfare and how this impacts them. And so they're out there trying to look cool and fit in with a group of people and do something fun, and don't realize how much work is cut out, to do this properly. So they cut corners. And then, they get burned out because of a whole different, slew of reasons. But a lot of times this creates a lot of turbulence for people who are truly trying to be in this field and do the right thing and move the field forward in a positive light.
Well, the one thing that I would say, I think it's like any other field of endeavor. And if you take, let's say a field of endeavor like salespeople, for example. Now, having been someone who in a past life, or actually in this life, but I had worked in sales, and I thought that I tried to be an advocate for my clients and to help them out in the field of endeavor, which I was in, which was media. But I know that the general thought on salespeople is like, oh, they're all the same and they're trying to rip you off and so forth. And I think if anything, maybe I was too nice, while I was in that field, but I was certainly never wanted to rip anybody off. And I think it's difficult when you're in a field and your heart is in the right place, but there's this great stereotype about everybody who's in it.
Oh yeah.
And I'm sure that you have to deal with that challenge.
Well, it's a duty in some respects. Like my original group that I formed in 2008 was actually a team, whereas now I'm more of like on a solo freelance level, I guess. But it was a team, and I tried to teach them all the time. It's like, think about this. We are not just researching, phenomena and the things that are taking place, but we're kind of the support group for these poor folks, because these people are ready to either walk away from, a home. It's destroying relationships, either personally, sometimes even professionally. It's just wreaking havoc on them. So it's really important to have that mindset that you're there to support them. I feel like our duty is a lot of different things. And sometimes that includes being kind of a mop-up crew, sometimes coming behind other groups who pragmatically approach things in a whole different manner than I would either think is appropriate or even professional in any manner. So, there's a fair amount of damage control that has to take place.
Now, do you think there is a place for, quote, ghost hunting, going out and trying to record EVP and things like that? And if so, how do you approach it? What do you think the best way to tackle that is?
If we're talking like, ghost hunting as far as just like the thrill of going out and trying to commune.
No, not necessarily. I mean, actually going into a place and trying to record evidence for the sake of recording evidence.
Sure. Well, obviously, there's a lot of ideal circumstances, scenarios that you'd like to have in place. Trying to find a location that is quiet, doesn't have a lot of foot traffic or even just vehicle traffic, so that way you have the best foundation to work from with regard to capturing, disembodied voices that are hard to even hear sometimes. So that's part of some of the ways to approach a particular site. But having smaller numbers of people, and then not only that, you kind of have to understand, the equipment you're working with and understand its capabilities, its pros and its cons. If you're taking a piece of equipment out and you're anticipating that it's going to be able to, cover a large audio, frequency range, you might be, giving yourself the short end of the stick there, whereas you might be able to capture more responses if you're using equipment that's a little bit more advanced. Now, that's not to say you can't use anything, heck, there was people, long ago using, all sorts of different equipment from cassette tapes down to phonographs, to capture, disembodied voices, spiritual voices. So I guess it's a lot of different factors at play, but the biggest thing is making sure that you're prepared with the right equipment, whether or not you're bringing analog recording equipment or digital equipment, and then making sure the media is clean and clear and ready for that. And then just having kind of a protocol, to ask your line of questions and make sure that there is ample time in between your line of questions, just in the event there's a delay or there's, other things going on. So that way you can try to avoid any, talking over each other.
One thing that's always fascinated me is this idea of the Frank's box, the idea of talking and hearing feedback in real time. Have you any experience with that or any thoughts on it?
Yeah. Frank Sumption's original box, it's got a very novel idea. And I know that he talks even about there being some spiritual guidance behind the design of this device. Fast forward to nowadays where we got groups using the spirit box and these hacked, RCA, FM, AM
Right.
radios. It's funny because you sit down and you talk with these people, and so many of these investigators out there that are using it are absolutely sold on some of the stuff that they're coming across. And the two things that come to my mind is it's a numbers game and you've got your facts wrong. The reason why I say it's a numbers game is if you think about it, a lot of these questions people are asking are very vague or they're very yes and no type questions. And if you listen to any radio broadcast at any time of the day, you're going to hear yes and no or some kind of, confirmation or, response that says, a denial of sorts. So you can get a varied, mixture of different types of responses, but it's a numbers game as you flip through these channels that you're going to get something that relates to it. And I've even had investigators where they'll ask a question and they'll let the radio go for a while, this, Frank's box, and some time's gone by, and then they get a what they believe is a response.
Right.
And again, you've just added more metrics to the numbers game for that, to take place. The other thing that I've run across with, researchers out there is that the argument is, well, we're getting, derogatory statements or we're getting, curse words. And it's actually stated publicly on the FCC's website that between, and I can't quote the hours off the top of my head, but between a certain hour in the late evening and then into the wee early morning hours, that you're allowed to talk about almost any subject, and it's even allowed to use profanity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does most radio shows and networks out there do that? No, because it's kind of kind of the unspoken.
Yeah, sanitized. Yeah,
exactly. However, a lot of these investigators out there will get these kind of results, and we don't know if it's a pirate radio station bleeding over onto the frequency they're using, or if in fact it was a program that was on and it happened to have a little bit more racy material, and so on and so forth. The fact is that the reality is that they'll argue that, that can't be something they talk about on radio, when in fact it is something that can be permitted to be on radio. So it's an education piece. For me personally, though, I don't really use the device just because of the caveats I pointed out.
Sure. Now, I know that you have one of your theories, and you sent me a note on it, and I looked at the article on your website, and we'll certainly give that out before we end up here tonight. It's called the SERM theory, an acronym, SERM. What does that stand for? In a nutshell, can you tell us a little bit about your theory?
Sure. It's the spectral emotion to radio frequency manifestation theory. What it really boils down to is I got to thinking about it. I've had a background in telecommunications for, years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And you do a heavy amount of, schooling on, radio frequency, or RF as we call it, and how it works and what we use it for. And obviously telecommunications is a very vast, occupational field. In that is a lot of things that we use. When we refer to radio frequency, you go to the doctor and they use devices, to check, your vital signs and the like. They're using equipment that actually is also registering and measuring using radio frequency. Same with equipment that we use out in, to measure signals for TV and data and things like that. There again are signals that we're measuring that are a part of the radio frequency spectrum. Now I got to thinking about it. I was like, well, why is it that, we're getting partial answers, most of the time when we're doing EVP sessions?
Right. And
I thought, well, let's go back to, the beginning when I was watching shows that, back when I was even an armchair investigator sitting there watching these shows, studying stuff, I'd start to ask questions. Well, wait, if they're using this, Olympus recorder or this Zoom recorder, what are its frequency response ranges? What can it capture as far as audio? And so then I started looking at that. And then I thought, well, some of the, after I started investigating, I started seeing, we're asking a lot of personal questions when we're doing these EVP sessions.
Sure.
And this could invoke emotional response, whether it's anger, happiness, sadness, you name it. So I started really, kind of playing with the idea. I was like, well, wait, there might be something going on here. Maybe there is a reason why we're only getting partial responses. Maybe it has something to do with the limitation of the equipment we're using, meaning the radio frequency response range that it can operate in, and that these responses we're getting are emotionally driven and they're changing. So what I started doing is I was like, well, is there anything behind the human body and radio frequencies? And sure enough, there is. There are documented cases out there where people have studied and been able to see that when you go from being, happy to sad to, angry, and so on and so forth, that your frequency overall changes. The human body has a radio frequency. And so that made me think. I was like, well, if I was dead and somebody asked me, who do you miss the most, right? That to me seems like a question that speaks to my heart. I would probably be emotionally driven to try to name off maybe one or two or more people.
Right.
In doing that, I might change frequencies, and they may only get a snippet like, Martha, when in fact I was naming off Martha, Bill, Sammy, and, Johnny or something. So, there's that. Or if you asked, like, let's say I went to the location where Melissa Marchant was murdered, and I asked, name your murderer and tell me what happened that night, right? And she's trying to respond, and she's emotionally charged as a result of it, being an intelligent being. Her frequency could change overall. And so, that's where it kind of, the genesis of that theory kind of came from. So I started pinning it out and really kind of going through it and doing my research. And it's been fascinating because as I've continued to develop this theory and even harden it, if per se, it's really been backed more and more by the research I keep doing. So it's actually a great thing, because there's been other times where I've played around with an idea, and as you start to research it, you're like, oh yeah, that's not going to work. Really quickly, you find that, it came to a dead end. There was something that, explained it very clearly, and it was not in the direction I thought it was going.
Now, something that I wonder about, and I have a very specific opinion on that. Most of the shows I don't give many opinions, but this specific thing I have a very concrete opinion on it, and I'd like to get yours. When doing these shows, I get to talk to a lot of different people, and sometimes we talk to a lot of people who are interested in kind of new age kind of topics, and I'll ask them the question, well, is there good and evil? And they'll essentially say, well, really, that's a miscasting. And there are people at different spiritual levels, but there's not really evil. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's kind of the idea.
Sure.
I, on the other hand, believe there is good and there is evil. And I notice on your site you talk about demonic entities, for example. Mm-hmm. Do you believe there's good and evil?
I absolutely do. Here's what's weird, right? Many times have I sat down with either clients or colleagues, or even just family and friends, trying to, discuss this from a philosophical standpoint. And I'm actually agnostic. Now, agnostic, for those who have actually read, and understand the term, doesn't mean you don't believe in a heaven or a hell or a God or a devil. It means that you pretty much don't subscribe to the, the norm, or what is, considered to be. And for me, I definitely believe in, good and evil. I actually went through a period of time in my life where I definitely feel like there was something demonic involved. And I feel very strongly that though it's extremely rare that these things happen, that it was in fact, one of those cases. Now, it's like the way I try to explain this a lot of times to folks is like, we've all walked into a room and you look across a room and you see somebody and you immediately go, ooh, I do not like that individual. I'm getting a bad vibe off that person. And then later on, somebody confirms that, yeah, that person was, a degenerate for whatever reasons. And, there's been many times you walk in a room and you immediately gravitate towards someone and really feel a kindred, spirit between each other. I think that more than it is on a religious level, it is more about good people and bad people. And so when you have spirits out there that are bad and good, they were that way probably in their lives. I theorize. So, the mix or the abuse that happens is the word demonic. I feel like so many people quickly jump to that conclusion as a result of TV and movies that, they smell a foul smell or they hear a voice that comes across gravelly, that immediately they're like, it's got to be demonic. And I think that's also where we abuse that term. And when in fact it could be, just a grouchy old person or a bad transmission or a miscommunication all the way around. But regardless, I think there's definitely good and evil.
Now, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. I know you're interested in numerous phenomena, not just ghostly phenomena, but cryptozoology, which some people tie into the paranormal, some say definitely not, and then
right,
and then UFOs and aliens and so forth. And when I first started out in this, I mean, I've been fascinated my whole life, but doing these programs 9 years ago, I always thought, well, this is in that category, and this is in this other category, right, and the third topic is in another category. The more I do it, though, and the more people I talk to, like Brad Steiger and people like that, there's some thought that all of this may be somehow connected. What are your thoughts on that? Or do you think these phenomena are kind of siloed in their own category, or do you think there's cross-pollination and maybe all of this is connected?
I think it's a little bit of both. I definitely, as I continue studying and researching all of this, am seeing a lot of stuff that correlates between the different, sectors of, because I look at the word paranormal as kind of like an umbrella term. And I know you got your ufologists out there and your cryptozoologists that are like, I don't want nothing to do with you and all that. I get it. However, for me, I just choose to include all of them. It's a fascination of mine and something I very much want to study. So with studying them, I definitely have seen that happen. And so as time's gone on, because I could tell you, back in 2008 when I formally started doing this, I really definitely had everything in a trestle. I was like, okay, Sasquatch over here and, the brown lady over here and, the grays are over here. But as time's gone on and some of the cases I've taken, you see that there is some tie. I can also say now, for the first time in the last year and a half, that I've actually experienced something in the last, year and a half that tied the two potentially together. And I've been talking with my very close colleagues about this particular experience and trying to understand it more and see if there is, something that is between, ghosts and maybe, extraterrestrial. So.
And I'm sure that you're going to be releasing something on that, so I won't ask you to give us the details on it, but when you're ready to share it, I would love for you to come back on and tell us about that.
You bet.
Now, you kind of touched on this at the beginning, and as we draw to a close, maybe we can revisit it a little bit. Let's say somebody's out there and they've watched the shows, but they have a legitimate interest in this topic. They're not just thrill-seeking, but they want to have their own quest for answers, and different people do that in different ways, and I think that should be applauded. And they're thinking about becoming a researcher of the paranormal. What are some of the guidelines or some of the suggestions that you give them from having walked that path?
Number one, have a conscience. Think about what you're doing and how it impacts everybody. I mean, people can go from being very curious and very innocently wanting to do something, and next thing you know, they become criminals. And in the face of the law, turn around and say, I was out just ghost hunting. And next thing you know, there's another negative mark on the belt against, paranormal research. And it's just a negative connotation we don't need and continually are fighting upstream against. So, think about it, be responsible. If you want to go out and do that, absolutely. Think about what you're doing though. If you're going trespassing, many people don't think about the fact that if they're in a cemetery, in the middle of a night, they're actually trespassing. So you got to think about those kind of things and, take them in consideration. Also, you have to be, put safeguards in place. I definitely feel like because the human body is such an amazing tool, and in many ways, it's its own kind of like transceiver. It's sending and receiving signals that we have to be careful with what we're doing out there. And so I would want others to think very carefully about grounding and shielding and things like that, taking those, methods to, protect themselves on a spiritual level. The other thing is, if you're going to be doing some of this stuff and going out in the middle of the night, or traveling to maybe desolate locations, abandoned structures and buildings. Like I said, make sure you have permission, but also make sure that either you're with other people or you have, some kind of map or, notes saying where you've gone.
Well, I got to tell you, people have been killed. I mean, I believe a few years ago, I know I was doing the paranormal report. We're doing it again, but in the first version, we covered, I think it was someone run over by a train.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I'm, you don't see people stumbling over things too much on the TV shows. They edit all that stuff out. But you've got to be careful legally, and you have to be careful physically.
Right. It's again, it boils down to being responsible. You're being responsible for yourself. You're being responsible for the locations you're going to. I mean, I know that this one's been thrown out there numerous times since it's happened. And to be honest with you, I'm grateful to keep throwing it out there because it was such a heinous act. It needs to be used as an example. But if you're going to go out with a bunch of friends, go partying, and you're in a location that's, a very historic landmark, and then you don't get the responses you want and you decide to burn it down. Yeah. Hell should be, paid for that.
Yeah, that's pretty reprehensible.
Yeah.
So the main thing is act like an adult, act like a responsible person, and be aware that your actions impact yourself and others.
Absolutely. It's not really hard as long as people, think it through and think about, what happens in this scenario and, what happens to other people or the location I'm at. So yeah, it's just, thinking things through.
If Ben, people want to follow you and find out the latest, whether it's a book, a new blog post, or your latest study, where can they go on the net to find all of that?
Well, probably my favorite place to direct people to, believe it or not, is my Facebook page. And that's facebook.com/ASEPorg, and that's ASEPORG. From there, obviously, they could be directed to my website and other links. However, my website is a-sep.org. And then my Twitter account is ASEP_tweet. And I have an iTunes account. I have my own radio show as well.
I was going to ask you about that. Yes.
Yeah, they can all find those links on my my either my website or my Facebook page as well. I'm a pretty active Facebooker, so I'm trying to get into Twitter, but there's so much demand for time, and I'm sure you know this more than anybody. It's hard to try to touch on each. So
yeah, I'm on Facebook, Google Plus, and Twitter, and I'm just getting back on Google Plus more. And I have a Pinterest account, but I just can't keep up with it all.
See, that's the new one. Yeah, that's the new one. I see a lot of people going towards, and I haven't even gone down that path yet. So I'm kind of behind the eight ball there, but definitely people can get in touch with me that way. I do have a main line for cases in the the Pacific Northwest, specifically Washington and Oregon. Folks can call that, and that's area code 971-200-5276. And you can email me at any time at asep@a-sep.org.
Ben Robison, thank you for joining us tonight on Ghost Insight.
Thank you very much, Jim. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you all for tuning in. We certainly appreciate it, and we hope you'll stay tuned for our next podcast. We'll talk to you next time, and have a great weekend, everybody, or a great week, or weekend, or whenever you're listening to this. I hope it's a great time. Bye-bye, everybody.